Okay, let's dive right into what is honestly one of the most fascinating and intricately detailed statutes you'll find in the ancient text. We're picking up the narrative right after the intense rebellion of Korach, stepping into a moment where the community desperately needs a mechanism to deal with, well, mortality. Today, we're dedicating this explainer entirely to the literal step-by-step procedure of an ancient purification ritual found in Numbers chapter 19. Get ready, because we're going to look closely at the physical actions, the incredibly strict boundaries, and the profound communal responsibilities laid out thousands of years ago.
Welcome to the Parties channel. Today we explain Numbers chapter 19 in a clear and simple way, step by step. We're going to go right through the Hebrew text, starting from verse 1, making absolutely sure we understand exactly who is doing what, where it's all happening, and why these highly specific instructions were given to the community to follow in the first place.
To make sure we capture every detail without getting lost, here's our roadmap for today. First, an introduction to Numbers 19. Second, the Red Heifer ritual. Third, the rules of uncleanness. Fourth, the purification process itself. Fifth, key ideas and clarifications. And finally, we'll wrap up with some practical lessons and a quick recap. All right, let's jump right in.
Section 1 is Introduction to Numbers 19. We are going to start at the very beginning of the chapter to look closely at the specific command given to the leaders. Take a look at the absolute precision in the language of these first two verses. The text says, "This is the statute of the law which the Lord has commanded, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, that they bring thee a red heifer, faultless, wherein is no blemish, and upon which never came yoke." Just notice those exact, uncompromising requirements laid out right here at the start.
Let's break that down into plain English, focusing on the who and the what. Essentially, God is speaking directly to Moses and Aaron, giving them a strict requirement for the whole community. They have to find and bring a red heifer, which is a young female cow. But actually, scratch that. It can't be just any red heifer. It must be completely faultless and without blemish. Physically, it has to be pristine from nose to tail. On top of that, it must be an animal upon which never came yoke. I mean, think about how rare this would be in an ancient agricultural society. To find a completely red animal with zero physical defects is hard enough, right? But finding one that has never once worn a yoke or been used for labor? That means this animal was intentionally spared from all mundane work from birth. It's entirely set apart.
Now that the exact animal has been identified, let's move to our second section, the Red Heifer Ritual. This covers the highly detailed physical process in verses 3 through 10.
Verse 4 gives us a crucial action in this procedure. It states, "Eleazar the priest shall take of her blood with his finger and sprinkle of her blood toward the front of the tent of meeting 7 times. Notice who's actually performing this. It's Eleazar the priest, Aaron's son, rather than the high priest himself. Why? Well, because the high priest was strictly forbidden from coming into any contact with corpse impurity, and as we'll see in a minute, this ritual carries temporary impurity. So the action Eleazar performs is extremely deliberate, taking the blood on his finger and sprinkling it exactly 7 times toward the front of the tent of meeting, which was the central sanctuary of the camp.
So let's trace the literal steps found in verses 3 through 6 to see how this builds into a complete ritual. Step 1. The faultless red heifer is given to Eleazar, and it is explicitly taken outside the camp. This is a super important geographical detail. It's not happening on the main altar inside the sanctuary. It's happening far outside the boundary of the living area. Step 2. The animal is slaughtered in Eleazar's presence, and as we just saw, he sprinkles the blood 7 times. Step 3. The entire animal is burned in his sight. The text is clear. Hide, flesh, blood, offal, the whole shebang is burned together. And while it's burning, the priest takes 3 specific physical items, cedar wood, hyssop, and scarlet wool, and throws them directly into the raging fire. These elements are consumed alongside the heifer and literally become part of the resulting ashes.
Now, the end of this process brilliantly illustrates a fascinating paradox found in verses 7 through 10. The entire purpose of this ritual, right, is to create ashes that will later be used to purify people. Yet the very act of creating these purifying ashes makes the makers themselves temporarily unclean. No way around it. The text explicitly states that the priest Eleazar, the man who actually burns the heifer, and even the clean man who eventually gathers up the cooled ashes to store them, they all become ceremonially unclean. Because of their physical contact with this process, they all have to wash their clothes, bathe in water, and remain unclean until the evening. Only then are they clean again. Once gathered, the ashes are stored safely in a clean place outside the camp for everyone to use whenever necessary.
So, what exactly requires someone to use those stored ashes? That brings us to Section 3, the rules of uncleanness, covering verses 11 through 16.
Here we encounter the core issue this chapter addresses, human mortality, and the profound physical impurity associated with a corpse. Verse 14 lays it out plainly. This is the law that applies when a person dies in a tent. Anyone who enters the tent and anyone who is in it will be unclean for 7 days. This is a massive physical boundary. In the ancient camp, where people lived in really close quarters, a death in a tent was an immediate communal crisis. Contact with death creates a severe state of uncleanness that lasts for a full week, completely halting a person's participation in regular camp life.
Understanding the precise boundaries of this uncleanness, detailed from verses 11 to 16, is absolutely essential. The text outlines specific ways this contagion spreads. First, obviously, physically touching a dead body makes you unclean for 7 days. Second, simply being inside or entering a tent where someone died makes you unclean. Imagine living in this ancient camp. If someone passes away, the impurity isn't just on their body. It fills the space. It's like a heavy cloud. That's why the text notes that every open vessel or container in that tent, anything without a lid fastened tight, also becomes unclean. The impurity is treated almost like a physical substance that can settle into open jars. Finally, it extends beyond the tent to the open field. If you're out in the open and touch someone who is killed or died naturally, or literally even if you just touch a human bone or a grave, you become unclean for 7 days. The rule is comprehensive. It covers all physical proximity to death.
When someone finds themselves in this state of severe uncleanness, how do they get out of it? Let's move to Section 4, the purification process, detailing verses 17 through 22. So here is the exact step-by-step remedy laid out in verses 17 through 19. Remember those ashes we stored safely outside the camp? Well, here is how they're used. Step 1. Take some of those ashes and put them into a vessel and pour fresh, running water over them. Step 2. A person who is currently clean takes a plant called hyssop, dips it into this specially mixed water, and physically sprinkles it upon the tent, the vessels, or the people who became unclean. Step 3. This sprinkling must happen on specific days, the 3rd day and the 7th day after the person became unclean. Step 4. On that 7th day, after being sprinkled for the 2nd time, the unclean person must wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. When evening comes, he is finally clean again. It's a highly structured, patient process of restoration.
But what happens if someone just ignores these steps? Verse 20 gives a really stark warning. But the man that shall be unclean and shall not purify himself, that soul shall be cut off from the midst of the assembly, because he hath defiled the sanctuary of the Lord. The stakes here are absolute. Notice the severity. If the water of cleansing hasn't been sprinkled on him by those specified days, his uncleanness remains. He essentially becomes a direct threat to the sanctity of the communal space and the safety of everyone around him.
Verse 22 explains exactly why this strict adherence and potential exile was absolutely necessary. This state of uncleanness is highly contagious. The text says in plain English that anything the unclean person touches becomes unclean itself, and anyone who touches that object becomes unclean until evening. Without this strict purification process, the impurity would spread like wildfire through the entire camp, completely disrupting daily life, agriculture, worship, everything. This structured remedy was vital for the survival of the whole community. Also, note from verse 21 that the clean person who simply sprinkles the water also has to wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. It's a really beautiful instance of the clean temporarily taking on uncleanness just to help restore their neighbor.
Let's move to Section 5, key ideas and clarifications. We've covered a lot of specific ancient terminology today, and I want to make sure we have literal, simple definitions for these physical elements.
First up is hyssop. We saw this thrown into the fire in verse 6, and then used as a tool in verse 18. Keeping strictly to the simple physical meaning of the text, hyssop was just a leafy plant commonly available in the region. Because of its structured, branch-like nature, it functioned perfectly as a natural brush or sponge. It allowed the clean person to dip it into the water and effectively sprinkle the droplets onto a person or a tent. It's literally just a highly practical, physical, agricultural tool utilized for this delicate ritual. No deep mystical properties attached to the tool itself.
Next is the water of sprinkling, or water of cleansing, mentioned in verses 9 and 17. Now, this wasn't just any old water drawn from a stagnant well or pond. The text specifies it must be fresh, running water, often translated directly from Hebrew as living water from an active spring or stream. And that is mixed directly with the gathered ashes of the flawless red heifer. This unique, active mixture was kept and used strictly for this specific purification from the impurity of death.
Finally, let's clarify that phrase, cut off from the assembly, found in verses 13 and 20. This means the literal removal or excommunication of an individual from the camp. Because of how contagious the text says this uncleanness is, an individual who stubbornly refuses to follow the purification steps threatens the entire community's well-being. Being cut off was a severe boundary enforcement to physically prevent that unyielding person from defiling the communal sanctuary.
So, having walked through all the literal verses and physical actions of this chapter, we have to ask a crucial question. What practical life lessons can we actually extract from this ancient, step-by-step statute today?
And that brings us to Section 6, Practical Lessons and Recap. Even without diving into deep symbolism, the plain, literal text of this chapter gives us some incredible insights into human behavior.
Here are our key takeaways directly from the text. First, the absolute importance of establishing and respecting clear boundaries. The text meticulously defines what is clean and unclean and separates what happens inside the camp versus outside. Order is required for any community to function safely. Second, we see a profound lesson in community care. Think about it. The unclean person cannot purify themselves alone. A clean person must actively step in, mix the water, and sprinkle them. Even more, those who help, the priest, the burner, the sprinkler, temporarily take on a level of uncleanness themselves to restore their neighbor. That is a powerful model of bearing one another's burdens. Third, there's a strict emphasis on following instructions diligently, step by step. Rebuilding order requires patience, waiting for the third day and then the seventh day. It simply cannot be rushed. Finally, the chapter forces a direct confrontation with the reality of mortality. Death cannot be ignored or glossed over. It's treated as the ultimate disruption to life, and dealing with it requires a serious, dedicated, week-long process of recovery before anyone can safely return to normal life.
To summarize, Numbers 19 provides a literal, highly structured path to deal with the inevitable reality of death and to safely restore individuals back into the fold of the community. Before we go, ask yourself, in our modern lives, do we have clear, structured ways to help our community recover from moments of profound loss? Or could we maybe learn something from the intentional patience of the third and seventh days? Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.